Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Michael Goring. I'm the President and CEO of the Mining Association of British Columbia. And welcome to the first of three panels on innovation and ESG hosted by MABC. Today I'm coming to you from Oboy Studios on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. This May we are celebrating Mining Month and the 120th anniversary of the creation of the Mining Association of BC. In recognition of our industry's past, present, and future, the theme for this year's Mining Month is innovation. British Columbia's mines and smelters have a long, proud history of embracing change and technological advancements. For generations, our industry has constantly showcased its ability to develop and implement new ideas, to find new deposits, and find creative ways to get them out of the ground with less impact. Thanks to this ingenuity, our industry has been a foundational driver of British Columbia for hundreds of years. And I know it will be for the next 120 years. We're looking forward to highlighting the many ways our sector is using technology to be more efficient and sustainable throughout Mining Month. But innovation extends to more than just science and technology. Innovation means change, which includes evolving our social and governance principles. Today's panel will be discussing a very important topic, diversity and inclusion in mining. Before we get underway, if you'd like to ask a question during the interactive portions of today's panel, please do so using the Slido widget you should see on your screen to the right of the video feed. I'd now like to welcome our esteemed moderator for our panel, Fiona Famulak. Fiona is the President and CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. Fiona is passionate about business and has over 30 years of international experience gained by working in private and non-for-profit sectors in Europe, Asia Pacific, and Canada. As an ambitious and accomplished executive, her passion lies in connecting with people and building communities around meaningful conversations that catalyze positive change. Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and congratulations to the Mining Association of BC on its 120th anniversary. Here's to the next 120. And also for celebrating Mining Month with three fantastic panel discussions on ESG and innovation. I've signed up for numbers 2 and number 3 already, so I'll be joining you during the rest of the month. Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be speaking with you today from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be today's moderator and to join this panel of experienced, energetic experts. I can tell you that this is going to be a really invigorating conversation given by the prep that we've had, and I'm looking forward to getting right into it. In terms of what we've got lined up for you today, we're going to cut straight to the chase. We've got roughly 55 minutes, and we're going to get straight into the status of diversity and inclusion in the mining industry today. We're going to chat about where it is that we would like to go and where we need to go in the future, and then we're going to discuss how we get there. So if you need a visual, I like pictures, I like gap analyses. So think about it. We're going to discuss today, we're going to discuss tomorrow in the future, and then we're going to fill in the gaps. And we're going to get it done between now and roughly 1 o'clock. So it's going to be a fun conversation. Today's discussion is also going to be a very frank discussion. And although not intended, it may trigger some anxiety, some discomfort, some trauma in some audience members. And if that is the case, or in preparation for, please make sure that you are well hydrated. Please make sure that you have a pen and notepad handy so that you can make some notes. And please feel free to sit up, stand up, move around, move some energy, and get comfortable. We just want everyone to be safe and to feel safe. And our greatest wish is for everyone on the call today to take away at least one nugget from the conversation, something that inspires you, something that causes you to stop you in your tracks and think about something in a fresh perspective. So that is our collective hope for all of you on the line today. So let's get going. Before we start the discussion, I'd like you to meet the panelists. We're in very good hands today with Christy Smith, with Tara Hassan, and with Bob Quartermain. As Michael has mentioned, Christy is the VP Indigenous and Stakeholder Engagement with Falkirk Environmental Canada. Tara Hassan is VP Corporate Development Silvercrest Metals, and Bob Quartermain is the founder and former chairman of Pretium Resources, Inc. So I think it's important that the audience knows a little bit about you, just a short bio, before we get into the meat of the discussion. So I'll start with Christy, I'll go to Tara, and then I'll move to Bob. Who are you and what do you do?
Danse, Hadi, wait. My name is Christy Smith. I'm from Comox First Nation and from the Bear Clan. I call upon my ancestors to be here today for this conversation because it's quite deep. And I want to let everybody know that I'm coming from the unceded traditional territory of the Williams Lake First Nation today. My pronouns are she, her. I share this so you know how to refer to me. And also, I have a strong belief in normalizing pronouns, which creates a safe space for our gender diverse community. I also want to acknowledge that today I am wearing red to show my support of Red Dress Day, National Awareness Day for the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit peoples in the country. Today is a day that we know that these families are grieving, and I just want to acknowledge that as we move forward. Personally, I've worked in Indigenous and community engagement for now 23 years. I think my bio said 22, so I did have a birthday or an anniversary, work anniversary. My career has allowed me to participate in the full cycle of mining, from exploration to reclamation of projects. And I'm not going to lie, the beginning of my career was made through very culturally unsafe spaces filled with tokenism, very strong discrimination, and a lot of harmful moments. And yet I am proud to say that I'm mentoring a multitude of Indigenous women to date, and I am a strong advocate for change. My methodology and my work is rooted in reconciliation and decolonization, and I work to break down those colonial processes imposed by our current structure, including our permitting structures and the structures that we operate within. And I'm proud to say that Falkirk Environmental Consultant is a leader in the area of diversity. We are led by a woman president, Jen Turner. Our team is made up of 80% women. And of that 80%, 25% are Indigenous and non-binary folks. So yes, thanks. That's me, and I'll pass it along to Tara.
Sure. Thanks, Christy, and thanks, Fiona. I am an engineer by background, and was lucky enough to have a father who was in engineering himself. So I got acquainted with many of the social norms and realities that come with engineering and pursuing what can be considered a non-diverse education field by background. I made what some would think in my family a crazy choice to pursue mining engineering, worked in operations for a handful of years in Northern Ontario, and got to see firsthand, what that process is, not as far as Christy in terms of through remediation, but seeing from exploration through to production. And then decided to shift my career and move into finance. So I spent 13 years as an equity analyst in the mining industry. Again, what I think would be fair to say is a non-diverse industry itself, and decided to move on from that after a very exciting and challenging career, and took the role as VP Corp Development at Silvercrest just in the fall. I'm also on the board of MABC Metals, and like Christy, I'm proud to say that my work with Silvercrest, we do have a very diverse executive team and board, which is very important to me, and it's important for me in my work and my career to use the privilege that I've had in terms of my education and opportunities in my career to help drive important change that needs to happen in this sector and beyond the sector as well, where I think we've seen over the last year that there's a lot of work to do when it comes to both diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, Tara. Bob?
Oui, bon, merci, bonjour tout. I go by he and him. My name is Bob Quartermain, and I've been in the mining industry and resource industry now for 45 years. Throughout it, I've learned to be respectful in my relationships and the work I've done. I spent 25 years as CEO of Silver Standard Resources, and then the last 10 years until I retired was as founder and chairman of Pretium Resources. When I look back at my career, I think some of the highlights come when I first started in the industry back in 1976. I worked with the Geological Survey of Canada in and around Baker Lake. We had a small camp of 5 people. There was myself and 2 other gentlemen, and we had 2 women at that time. And we had to interact with the Inuit population. So that was a start of understanding respectful relationships in the industry. In Silver Standard days, we built the Pirquitas mine in Argentina. One of the aspects in building the mine is we trained 20 of the local indigenous women how to drive 100-ton trucks. We put them in simulators for many hundreds of hours, and we took individuals who, some have maybe never been in a vehicle, to actually operate that mine and saw the benefit of that in that community. And most recently, working with Pretium in northern British Columbia, and we are focused on British Columbia today to a certain extent. I'm very proud of the work that was done by the team I was with, and certainly the team that continues to operate Pretium. There's about 27 to 30% First Nation employment through a wide variety of bands and First Nations locally around the mine, and I think gender parity is in the 15 to 20% range as well. So it's been important, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today in bringing an international perspective that I've been able to gain over that 45-year career.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you again to Christy, Tara, and Bob. As I said to the audience, I feel like we're in very safe hands today. Each of you bring a ton of experience earned here in Canada and also abroad. And I know you bring very unique perspectives to this conversation. So let's get started. So in my preparation for this panel discussion, of course, I did some research. I read some resources. Thank you, Michael, for sending me a ton of really good stuff. And this audience understands, of course, that the mining industry is fundamental and foundational to the economy of BC and to the standard of living that we all enjoy from every corner of BC. The stats are really compelling. The industry impact of the mining industry in 2019 generated $12.3 billion in economic activity, provided more than $1 billion in taxes to governments. And an interesting stat from 2018 that I picked up, the industry supported 3,700 small and medium businesses and Indigenous businesses in 215 communities by purchasing $3 billion of goods and services in those communities. So the mining industry has a large reach into all corners of BC and all sectors of the economy. So thank you to everyone on the line today and outside who's involved. Workforce stats are a little bit more challenging. And when I looked at the statistics for workforce, the industry has a higher number of workers in the 55 to 64 range, and also in the 65 to 74 range. So that suggests that a lot of the workers in the mining industry are approaching retirement, which then begs the question, what's next? And we'll get to that. In 2017, women represented 19% of the BC mining industry, whereas women represented 48% of the workforce generally. Indigenous workers represented 5% of the BC mining industry or the mining workforce compared to 3% of total population. And immigrants represented 18% of the mining workforce compared to 43% of the provincial workforce. So there's some really interesting gaps that are there that I know are going to fuel some of the conversation today. So that's really where I have questions, because we know that the mining industry is no stranger to ESG, given the amount of work around regulation and so on in the environmental sphere and also in health and safety. However, we're here to discuss the G in the ESG today, the governance piece, and specifically diversity and inclusion. So my question to Christy, and then I'll move to Tara, and then I'll move to Bob again. In your opinion, how are we doing vis-a-vis diversity and inclusion in the mining industry?
Thank you, Fiona. How we're doing? I don't think we're doing well. As much as there's been a lot of work that we have progressed through in the last little while, I still, it is very clear that women, Indigenous people, non-binary folks are some of the most underrepresented demographics in our industry. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think we may get into that a bit later. There is a lack of representation in management and the board level of women and Indigenous folks as well. And most of these underrepresented demographics finish their career without excelling into these positions, which is disheartening. And I think there's a lot of change that needs to occur to make these positions break down some systemic barriers, look at some cultural systems that can be in place to be more available to those individuals wanting to make these career jumps. So I would say my bottom line answer is we are not doing well. Do I think there's a lot of opportunity? Absolutely, yes.
Welcome back. I have so many questions. Tara.
Sure, thanks. I mean, I'd have to agree with Christy as well. I think we're in the very early stages of this discussion and the progress that we can make. I think it's very important that these discussions are being had and that there is more of a focus on addressing these issues. Some of that has come with the advent of ESG and the pushes from investors and rating agencies to ensure that companies are doing the right things. But I think it's really important that companies do the right things because they should be doing the right things, not because they're mandated to do the right things. And there's a ton of research that shows that bringing diverse voices into the room and making them part, because I think it's important we're talking about diversity, but the other bit of it, which I'm sure we'll get into on further questions, is the inclusion bit and making sure that you're not just attracting this talent, but you're making space for this talent to be able to perform and to be able to participate in this sector. And I think there's a lot of research that shows that that's not just the good social thing to do, it's also a really important decision from a business perspective, because these diverse choices make sure that you're moving your business in the right direction. So I think as Christy said, we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm really pleased to see industry organizations like MABC, and I'm involved with AME as well as vice chair there. These are conversations that are happening at industry level, at corporate level, and these are important discussions to be having. But now we need to really put things into action and move forward with some of these, discussions into actual reality and moving it forward.
Really well said. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Bob, in terms of your opinion, where are we and how are we doing in the field, in the C-suite, and also at the board table?
Well, I would agree with both what Christy and Tara have said, that we continue to have to do more in that regard. When we look at C-suites, we probably need more diversity around it. Right now, the thought is that you're looking at binary gender parity, at the C-suite, but we need to make sure that we engage all aspects of society and the various communities and stakeholders that we want to have included and come in a workforce. As you pointed out in your comments, we in the mining industry have a demographic issue that we're going to have to look to fill as we go forward, and we have to create a very welcoming and a more normalized workplace for everyone across the industry. When I look at what Pretium was able to do with its workforce in Northern British Columbia, it certainly has been respectful, and one where it's engaging. It has involved a lot of community members, so it has good diversity with respect to First Nation communities, as well as with its gender parity. But as an industry, as you pointed out from your statistics, we have to do more. And that's why, listening to Christy and Tara and their perspective, because I think it's some of the younger members of our industry who are going to help and bring the diversity change that we need in order to continue to expand it across a wide platform people who want to work with us and in this great industry in this province.
Well said. So in terms of the realities of today, can we just jump into that conversation for a minute or two? What are the realities that women, Indigenous peoples, other underrepresented groups, what are the realities of their day to day? What are they facing? What are the barriers that need to be addressed and that need to be broken down in order for us to begin to normalize this conversation? Christy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, very, very good question. I think some of the major barriers begin with personal self-reflection from the executive level, HR level. A lot of times these decision-making or processes that are implemented are coming from a place of privilege. We need to shift that mindset. We need to be able to identify where our decision making is coming from, where our processes are coming from. There's a lot of, unfortunately, inadvertently assumptions and stereotypes that are implied when speaking with women, Indigenous and non-binary folk. So the question is, are you bringing those assumptions to these processes and decisions? Companies really need to start investing in personal training, executive level coaching, implementation of culturally validated systems. So this includes HR, procurement, and with this self-reflection and ability to see where individuals are coming from, we can start breaking some of those barriers down. There are systemic barriers. We don't have a lot of systems that have been culturally validated. We put systems in place because they're proven to be appropriate, unquote, or quote unquote appropriate. But are they really culturally validated? Do they work? We need huge cultural shifts within companies. We need to understand terminology, which includes pronouns and being respectful of the whole diverse group that we have that works in the mining industry. And as Tara had indicated, like we get into this diversity and inclusion, this is going to promote transformational leadership. We're going to have new ideas and this will increase our economic growth. This is something we need to do. But as I laid out, it's going to take a huge shift.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Come back again. Tara, before I jump to you, I'm also going to invite the audience. Now is the time to start loading your questions into Slido, because we don't want this to be a one-way conversation. So please add your questions to Slido and I'll get to as many as I can. So Tara, same question. What are the realities that you've witnessed in your career to this point? What are the barriers?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's, I think whenever you talk about diversity and the challenges that we have, it's, the common thing you'll hear is you need people to see themselves being able to achieve in this business. And, the reality is because it hasn't, most of the paths I've taken haven't been diverse. And when I say that, we're not just talking about women or Indigenous, we're talking about BIPOC, LGBTQS, like everything needs to be on the table. And I think diversity from an ESG perspective has been very focused on women and getting that gender parity. And that is super important. And it's obviously been something that I've, personally seen in my career. I've typically been one of a handful of women on a team. And that does make it hard sometimes to feel like you can ask for advice or relate your experiences to others. So those are important. But I think, in terms of barriers, those start even earlier than being in your role. I think those start from, the time that young people are learning about the opportunities in different sectors and industries and being told what they can and cannot do. So I think that starts with education really early and encouraging with industry partnerships and commitments to, as early as elementary school, getting in and helping shape people's perception of what they're able to achieve and showing them examples of what success looks like in this business from a diverse group of people. And then, as Christy said, like that education just has to continue and have a big culture shift. I think, I'm really excited about what we're seeing from young people coming up, their diversity of opinion and, how advanced they are in terms of having these conversations. I think that's going to bring a lot of energy to the table and a lot of change. But that, as Christy said, has to come from the top as well, and have that big cultural shift. So I do think there needs to be commitments to education, employing and reaching out to people who are very skilled in these areas to come in and help put these systems in place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. And it reminds me, on having come from the construction industry, what you're describing is very similar in the construction industry in terms of statistics, in terms of barriers, in terms of the importance of getting to youngsters at an early age and helping them to understand what they can do. And you're right, Tara, I think the young folks today do have energy, they do have vision, they do see what they want to do, but the barriers are in the way. So it's up for us to take those barriers down. Bob, you've traveled the world in your career. What kind of experiences have you seen or been part of in terms of barriers to diversity and inclusion in the mining industry?
I think a lot of it comes from bias. We're all brought up and educated. I came from small town New Brunswick, and so you grow with your biases. And in order to get comfortable with diversity, you need to be familiar. You need to get normalized with the various aspects of whether it's be racial, whether it be sexual. And I think that normalcy helps in the education part of it, because it's only through education that you're able to get people where you can build the capacity in them to be able to be accepting of others and remove their biases that they have. And we as an industry need to start doing that, as you point out, at the C-suite. We already saw with the NASDAQ in December of last year. It has put a proposal to the SEC that going forward, all NASDAQ listed issuers are going to have diversity around the boardroom table, and that includes one woman director, but also a member from either a minority group or from an LGBT community or BIPOC. And so we're seeing that being mandated. And so I think it's up to the C-suite and individuals to work with their HR departments, and many companies may find they're actually going to have to bring in chief diversity officers or officials who can help on understanding, because when you look at mining and where we operate, we're often in small communities, and these communities have to be accepting for diversity. You have to make sure you have the appropriate support systems there if you're going to be bringing in a more diverse group of workers who may be either religious-wise, race-wise, or depending on their gender identity, are going to have to find that the work environment is going to be safe. And so in smaller communities, it's often, again, in educating and providing that support. As an exploration geologist, I've worked in many small communities around the world, and often you'll see it's the bias that is inherent there that you have to look and educate through. And I think that's going to be a key component going forward for this industry, is one of education across the platform, all the way from the C-suite, all the way down to the stope.
Interesting. I'm going to challenge that. I hear you. The C-suite is really important. Of course, the tone needs to be led from the top. But isn't that part of the challenge? The C-suite is filled, respectfully, with males who are white, who have made their career in mining, perhaps approaching retirement. Why would they change now? I'll open it up.
Well, I'll take it from I was just going to take it. I think they're going to be forced into doing it by mandate. Sorry for cutting in, but yeah, I'll let you go.
I'd love to comment on that.
Awesome. Okay.
Unfortunately, in the C-suite, if we're talking about mandating, I feel that we're going back to a level of tokenism, a level of, oh, dang it, we have to bring a woman on, or oh, dang it, we need to bring somebody on to fill this this quota or this position. And when we talk about mandating, I feel in essence, we're almost taking a step back in some ways. Yes, it's a good thing, but on the other level, it becomes something that could be perceived as a chore. And so I really encourage companies to do this because they have sincerity, because they want to do this, and it's not because they're being mandated. And I don't, Bob can probably speak to this in further detail, but yeah, that would just be my 2 cents on that comment.
A valuable 2
Yeah,
cents.
Fiona,
I'm going to throw it to you, Tara, because I know that you have.
sorry.
You coined. Go ahead.
Sorry, there's a delay there. No, I completely agree with Fiona on that, or with Christy on that rather. I think if I speak to any senior women in this business or women coming up in this business, that's our biggest fear, is that you work so hard and you get a position, and the perception is that you got that because of a diversity quota or a mandate. And it is a difficult conversation, because the reality is, if we don't start mandating things, it's going to be 20, 30 years before we get this diverse workforce that we need, not because it's a mandate, but because we need this change, like you said, on those stats on unemployment, and also just directionally where this business is going. I mean, when we think about decarbonization and how important that's going to be, we need new diverse talent at the table, thinking about how we take the mining industry to the next level, how we continue to participate in a world that's changing and putting a lot more focus, not just on the G, but on the E and the S. And so I don't know how to get around it, because to get to make the leaps that we need, and I've had this conversation with people from all different facets of the industry. Mandates sound bad, but they can also in some ways move us forward and leap us forward a long ways, so that we don't have to wait 30 years and be in an industry that gets sort of outdated because we haven't made the changes that we need to make.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to steal your phrase, Tara. You said the other day, it's the culture versus the checkbox exercise. We don't want to be checkbox as meeting quotas of women, quotas of Indigenous peoples and underrepresented groups. We want to be there because we're supposed to be there, all of us, and for the right reasons, because the company wants to do the right thing, and as one of you said earlier, it's good business. It's simply good business. So let's get on the bus. Bob, I want to turn to you for a second. So what kind of steps could the C-suite take? You mentioned the diversity officer and so on and so forth. Are there policies, though, around childcare, around training, around flex hours, so on and so forth, that an organization can be or should be implementing in order to clear the way?
Yes, and I would go back and agree with both Christy and Tara spoke on this thing. I think it's one about education, and I'm not about mandating either. I think we're going to be forced to it, is my point, unless the C-suite and management of the companies actually do this on their own accord. And there are a variety of things that they can look at when you're looking at your employee base, about where they're living. Many companies often operate remote camps, such as the one that Pretium does. And you need to be looking at your employee base, what support systems they need, both when at the mining camp and when they're at home. Now with communications, we can keep that interaction between families going better, but separation in those situations is not often optimal. In smaller communities, where often the mines are located, as I was trying to make the point earlier, you need to have the support systems in and around there to be able to acknowledge the diversity that employees may have, who you want to attract from maybe larger centers. And so I think there's going to be more of a need of expanded understanding and education in the HR function with respect to corporations going forward, and whether that's bringing in a diversity officer. It probably can help in much larger corporations, but it's understanding the landscape where you're working in, the people are going to be working in and around and supporting you as the contractors, and making sure that you provide a respectful work environment for them, as well as being open to education on around diversity, which is the topic we're discussing today. It really boils down to education, understanding, and familiarity.
Thank you. Tara, I want to come back to you for a second. Do you think that COVID-19 has created an opportunity to improve on our diversity and inclusion practices, or has it hindered progress?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two sides to that, because as I hear Bob talking about the challenges of remote work, and I've worked at remote camps, and you can't just take 2 weeks off if you're the primary caregiver for your children. That becomes a really big challenge. But I think there's so much data that shows that women have taken a step back in COVID in their careers because of the situation that's emerged, where I think there is an opportunity, and something that we're considering even ourselves at Silvercrest is, you have this concept of a head office and everyone has to be in the office every day. I think there's lots of companies, including ourselves, who are having those discussions around, what does the office look like going forward? Are we willing to recruit people from, outside of the immediate area? What are the expectations in terms of, working hours? I think a lot of that will change, and I think that could create an opportunity. But in the interim, where kids can't be in school in some places, and you've got other challenges around lockdowns, etc., I think that has certainly hindered progress from a diversity perspective.
Interesting. You're right. COVID has had a particularly bad hit on women and Indigenous businesses. So, Christy, same question to you. I would layer on also, what's the impact of innovation and technology on diversity and inclusion? Has it helped, or has it hindered progress there?
Statistically, from an innovation perspective, diversity and inclusion, as with most things, benefits innovation and in the innovation ecosystem. So I think we can say that the more you diverse, the stronger you have ideas that come out that flourish, the diversity of ability to showcase that your innovation is going to improve the economic. So there's a raft of things. I just wanted to comment a little bit on the COVID thing, and I was just reflecting on Tara's comments, and I recently read an article that did say that women in industry specifically have taken a hit over COVID. I didn't quite get the percentage, but as we're talking about what we can do better, and as we're showcasing movement forward, I think we also have to reflect on the fact that we may be going backwards due to COVID. So just wanted to highlight that.
Interesting. Bob, what are your thoughts there? Do you think COVID has helped, hindered progress in the diversity and inclusion field?
I would probably agree with my other panelists that it's probably put a little barrier right now from the fact that, if we look in the mining industry and the remoteness of many camps, if you have a primary caregiver, they may be having to take more time at home because of the fact of schools and things perhaps being shut down. And so it's certainly, one thing we all want to work through. I know that most mining companies have protocols in place that are trying to keep their people safe. I mean, that's the main priority and function that the industry has, is creating that safe environment for individuals. But I would defer to both Tara and Christy. They're probably a little closer than I am at this point in time, but would agree with the comments that they've made on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Fiona, if I can maybe just,
please do.
Sorry, I was just going to add on to the discussion around technology and what that can do here. I mean, mining has historically never been amazing at adopting technology and moving forward, but we have seen a real shift in automation at operations, and what opportunity that creates is to have a diverse population not at a camp operating equipment or staying in tune with what's happening in the operations or construction side of the business. And I think this whole idea of people working from various locations, like the world has become, I think, more accepted that is an option. And I think that could be a really exciting shift in the business, but I appreciate that will probably take some time.
Yep. Well, if I think even of this discussion today, we're doing it virtually. I don't know what the registration is today, but there could be people from across the world leaning into this
Mm-hmm.
conversation and potentially feeling out whether they should be moving to BC to be part of the mining industry. So from that perspective alone, I think COVID has opened up conversations that we wouldn't normally be able to have. So but we come back to the barriers. Okay, we've got some Slido questions. So this is a question specifically for Bob. Bob, how do we reach C-suite leaders like yourself and help them to act on diversity and inclusion? Is it training, or should we tie compensation and bonuses to a leader's measurable D&I performance? Really good question, Kylie. Thank you. Bob, over to you.
Well, that's a great question. If you tie someone's compensation, you're certainly going to get their attention. I think it's one about education. That the HR function in a company should also be reaching up to board members, looking at their skill matrices, looking at the familiarity that they have. And I say, one of the challenges is everyone has their own biases, and they do in the C-suite. And so we have to come in and determine what those biases may be, determine what familiarity they have with diversity, just besides gender, and see that that's reflected in the annual information circular and in the discussion around the boardroom table. I want to pick up on what Tara was speaking about. Is technology is a great way for us to be able to bring in a much wider, diverse cohort into this industry, because if we can get a much more technology advanced industry, then there's a wider platform of people who can do it, and we can do it remotely. And so I think that's key. One key element that we should be focusing on. But at the C-suite, yes, over my career of working in small communities around the world, I've learned to be accepting of many cultures. And I think that we have to just find it in the C-suite and in the boardrooms that there needs to be education, familiarization around diversity. And if there needs to be some template around it that has a level of compensation attached to it, then perhaps we need to look at that. And it's something that is required that the C-suite and boardroom tables need to do ahead of the game, because if not, their shareholders and part of ESG will start to mandate it. And I think, to Christy points out, we want less mandated, and we want more acceptance and more leadership at the C-suite and the boardroom with respect to diversity.
Well said. To simply do the right thing. Absolutely. We've got a question here. I'm going to throw it up to the three panelists from Andy. We hear a lot about the next generation and what it will bring, but what can we do right now for those who are in a minority? Waiting could put off these, considering mining and exploration as a career, which means that the next gen never enters to rescue and change the industry. Well said, Andy. I'll open it up. Who wants to take that one?
I might just jump in and bounce off of Bob's comment on bias, because I think a lot of the bias is in even how we attract people into this industry, and relying on your own networks, which can be a big mirror of who you are and what your background is. So I think making sure that when we're going out to recruit talent, that we're putting a really broad range on how we're looking at those hiring avenues, making sure that we're reaching out to organizations that could help advance the talent that's coming into the business. Because I agree with Andy, if we just wait for this change, it's going to take way too long, and we will miss it. And mining, it has been such a tremendous industry for me. I mean, there's definitely been hard challenges that I've encountered, but it is such a great business to be in, and it's one that I'm very passionate. I know we need as a society, and I think we could really create an opportunity to bring a lot of new, exciting talent to the table, and I think we'd be missing an opportunity if we don't, moderate some of our hiring practices, and then also, as Christy mentioned earlier, changes internally, because it's not just getting someone in, it's making sure that they feel included when they get there, so that they're, there's all sorts of stats on people who leave the mining industry within the first 5 years of their career, and that's something that we need to make sure we don't let happen so that we can retain this talent and, grow them through their careers into the business.
Mm-hmm. A follow-up question I have, and I will come back to Matthew's question in a minute. There's going to be many employers on the line today, myself included. So what kind of conversation should we be having right now with our teams, with our crews, about our plans? If we're not as good at diversity and inclusion as we need to be, how do we even begin the conversation with our people? Because it can't just come miraculously from the top as a fait accompli. So how do we engage? Christy, I'm looking at you because you're getting ready to say something. Thank you.
Well, I'd love to say for the other comments as well. I think, personally, with my own personal values, I need to see that they're aligned with the company. This next generation that is coming into the mining world, their personal values are first and foremost. Before, like 20, 30 years ago, we just needed a job. And so we worked in this job for 20, 30 years. Now we see the next generation come in, and they're looking to see that the values that they hold personally align with the company. Personally, I would never be happy to sit on a C-suite that was mandated, because that wouldn't align with my personal values. I need to see that the executive level have openness to diversity and inclusion, and that they are willing to do executive coaching as well as invest in these programs throughout the company. So when we talk about this next generation that's coming up, we really need to think about, when we're recruiting and we're retaining, that we're aligning with the values of who we're trying to attract. So that was just 2 cents on that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Values driven. Question from Matthew. There's a strong Tahltan participation in the industry and the territory. How can we expand that to other nations and regions in BC? Bob, do you want to take that? You've spoken about that, I think, in previous conversations that we've had.
Yeah, well, where the Peridium mine operates, we certainly have engagement with the Tahltan, and there are many Tahltan who work there, as well as some of the other Red Chris mine, which is in around the area. Years ago, the Tahltan started, I believe it was the Tahltan Development Corporation, and were able to come up with the skill sets that they needed to be able to support in mining. And I think it would be perhaps incumbent on other First Nations, which are elsewhere in the province, to be able to reach out to the Tahltan and its operational experience, to be able to help them as they perhaps develop their own corporations, which could assist in them in establishing support for mining industries, which may be in and around their own traditional territories. So I think it's one of education between First Nations that could help export those skill sets and get them into many more of the First Nations around the province.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you, Matthew, for your question. Question from Julia. What about good conversations? Thank you, Julia. What about some of the other barriers to diversity, such as harassment and discrimination, that many people experience that prevents people from staying and advancing in their careers? How do you see us advancing initiatives to reduce harassment in our industry? Tara?
Sorry, I thought Christy looked like she was ready to jump in there. I think, this is a great conversation, and hi, Julia, we went to Queen's together, so nice to see you pop up here. I think, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of research showing that people don't want to stay in this business for a long time, and it's, sometimes due to situations like this. I have unfortunately had moments in my career that have been difficult, and to be frank, there hasn't been a lot of avenues for me to report those, or to feel like I could report those in a way that wouldn't come back on me and end up impairing, my career progress. So I think in order to do that, we need not just strong policies, but also action around those. I growing up in the finance business, I was always kind of, told, you can make a complaint, but like you'll be the one that gets pushed out of this industry. And that is such a, a terrible way to advance a business and to make sure that we're able to bring these diverse, voices in and keep them. And I think, there has to be a commitment from executives that if situations get reported, that they'll be treated, in confidence, that they will be addressed, and that the punishment and penalty for those individuals that are undertaking these isn't just a slap on the wrist. It ensures that if someone is being harassed, that they don't need to be showing up to work the next day dealing with their harasser, which often case unfortunately is the situation. And that's just not acceptable if we want to make progress in this business.
Yeah, well said.
Can I comment on that as well?
Jump in, Christy, please.
I completely resonate with Tara, and thank you for that. Julia, I completely see this as an area where we have a lot of work to do. I see that regardless of education, it is the outcome and I guess discipline around when things like that happen, which is very discouraging because, like Tara said, it just gets pushed aside. Being a woman tends to and to Tara's comment, you don't want to be the one that's complaining because your job may be on the line. So this is a super sensitive area, and it's an area that needs a lot of attention, a lot of work. I think that as we progress, we need to have systems in place that are safe and unharmful. But currently, we have a lot of unsafe and harmful environments that we work within.
And not just in this industry either. Work to do. I am going to take a couple more questions. I'm just conscious of our time here. We could go for hours because it's some great conversation. Okay, a question from Amy. What is the impact of certification systems and ESG indices on diversity and inclusion? Bob, any comments on that? I would assume that the more diverse and inclusive we are, the better positioned we are, but I'll let you comment.
Right. I would think, again, it gets around to mandation. So if you're going to put certification in place, that can only help in achieving the goals that we want. And just picking on, the conversation both with Tara and Christy when it comes to diversity, if we look across the broad platform, some minorities are certainly visible, and there's other minorities who are not, which is within the LGBT community. And so one has to be able to create safe places for them. And you often have individuals who may not be self-identifying within the industry. And it's one area where the industry can do more to be more welcoming in creating that platform for acceptance and diversity as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you can create harm in a space because we make too many assumptions that we're speaking to certain folks when they may be non-binary or Indigenous people that look maybe not as Indigenous as you assume. So those spaces are they're sensitive, and unfortunately we see them on a regular basis. Sorry, go ahead, Fiona.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for jumping in there, Christy. My question, I was going to change tack a little bit. For the companies that have crossed your paths, that are doing diversity and inclusion well, how are they? What kind of targets are they setting, and how are they measuring their success? I can see you all thinking. Who wants to take that one? I'm just curious. I want to know how we can measure a feeling. Like, how can we? There's diversity and there's inclusion, but inclusion is a feeling. So how do we measure our success in the D&I space?
I mean, I think maybe I'll jump in. I think, back to the question around ESG ratings and indices and the huge rise in ESG investing. I think, that has the opportunity to really capture from a disclosure standpoint only, I will say, if we're making strides. So not just measuring today how diverse is your workforce. And I think, to be clear, I think this should not just be a conversation around executives and board. This should be, workforce wise. So when we start reporting from an ESG perspective, I think it should be, what's the change year over year in your workforce turnover stats. Like, those are important numbers to be able to balance that culture, and then also pay parity across the diverse populations. There's not going to be a lot of people that want to do that, frankly, at this point. But those are the things that I think we should be moving towards, and I think that will be encouraged to be moved towards with the ESG rating agencies. I think that there's a lot of challenges. There's been a lot of good brought forward by the rating agencies. There's a lot of challenges too, because as a company, we have 20 different rating agencies to report to. It can become just a checkbox exercise with a full-time job doing that. And I think companies really need to have a focus on, here are our goals, have KPIs that are tied to ESG metrics and are measurable, because a lot of people have KPIs that you just can't measure, and that doesn't really drive change. And making sure that it's communicated to your audience, investors, stakeholders, your local communities, what it is that you're moving forward, so that people can hold you accountable, because that's part of the challenge, is that there hasn't been a way to do that in the past.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tara. Before we wrap up, Christy and Bob, do you want to lean into that question about measuring our success in the D&I space?
I can go. I echo a lot of what Tara said. It does have to come from a company perspective and how they're going to manage their KPIs. I don't think we can say, here's a checkbox and you get a gold star, without knowing that this is a true investment by the company. And we'll see that as the accountability to their employees, to the community, to others, rolls out to the Indigenous communities that they work within, and to the Indigenous and non-binary folk that work for them and are within the community themselves. It is only through that, I think, that would provide like an accurate, accurate data. But it's going to be interesting, because we have, and I'm going to use the term white privilege, but that's our C-suite right now. We have a lot of change and shift. We personally, as I mentioned, have to self-reflect, and then in that, create those business goals for diversity and inclusion that will be that company's choice and reflect our values. And then it may also be through exit interviews, things like that we can get a bit of an assumption from the accountability side, but it is going to be super hard and difficult to track.
And it's important. So we have to move through the difficulty and the challenge and get to the other side. Bob, do you have a few comments to make before we wrap up here today? In terms of that question.
It's about values. It's about a corporate's values and the leadership, and across everyone within that corporation. It may be a small mining company with a few people, or it could be one with tens of thousands of employees, as we see what the companies have here. And it's the values that the C-suite want to have, but it's also the values that is inherent across all members who may be working in the company. And, this conversation that's, I really want to focus on today is we want to get away from mandating. And I think that's because you can't mandate acceptance, and you can't mandate, acceptance of diversity. People need to recognize what their biases are. They need to familiarize themselves with their biases, and then understand diversity better, and then embrace it, and understand that diversity across the platform of the company will just be a good thing, because then their companies start to reflect the societies that they work in. And that's right, where we need to go with diversity.
Yep. Which brings us full circle back to comments that Christy and Tara made about an hour ago, which is our prospective workforce of the future needs to see themselves in our organizations,
Right.
in the field, in the
Right.
C-suite, at the board table. We need to be role modeling and clearing the way. Well, the little red clock on my top right-hand corner is flashing crazily, so I guess that signals that we're almost done. But Michael, I'm just going to take one more minute, if I may. So, in terms of wrap-up, Tara and Christy and Bob, a great conversation. So, thank you for your thoughtful comments and the energy that you brought to the conversation. One more ask of you: if you had 1 minute to share with the audience one thing that you think they need to take away from today's conversation, what would it be? And I will go in reverse this time. Bob, I'll start with you, then Tara, and then Christy will have the last word.
Right. Then I think it's important from the conversation on diversity, and it's a comment that Christy made, which is important that I need to pick up. You can't look at an individual and from that make an assumption of who they are. You need to understand how they want to be referred to by he, they, and we find with a new group, a new cohort's going to come into this industry, that they're going to dictate how they want to be recognized. And so we need to move away from, binary conversations into ones where we just recognize individuals for who they are. We see the talents they have, and then we create an environment where we're going to accept their talents and they're going to help us grow our businesses.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Tara.
Sure, thanks. I think going back to the question that was asked earlier, I think by Andy on Slido is, how do we make this change happen? And I would encourage, I think conversations like this are very important, but I'd encourage, people also to challenge, not only higher up, but challenge people, their peers in the business to have these hard conversations, to discuss, ways to affect change, to get involved in this dialogue and to not just to listen, but to also make suggestions, because I think, having, this white privileged group of CEOs make the calls is probably not going to end up with the shape that we want this to be necessarily if there's not other input coming in. I know that can be challenging, but it starts with small conversations and small steps. And I think that can lead to a lot of change.
The sum of the parts. Absolutely. The sum of the parts. Thank you, Tara. Christy.
I think I'm going to end on that self-reflection piece. When you are coming to the table or you're creating these policies and procedures or at the C-suite, really reflecting about, are you inadvertently looking or seeing stereotypes? Do you have assumptions and preconceived notions of, when you are speaking with women, Indigenous and non-binary folk, these personal self-reflections are the only way that you can reflect how you come to the table. And they may be there for a long time, but asking yourself on a continuous basis, why am I speaking about this? Decentering yourself and looking at how to center these issues, and, investing in yourself as well on education around terminology. Educating yourself if required. Take a course on the side. If you are internally looking at how you come to the table and you still see those stereotypes and assumptions popping up, that's okay. Just look to that as an area of growth, and change will occur.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. So thank you to our three panelists today. Thank you, Christy Smith, Tara Hassan, Bob Quartermain. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with the three of you today. And on behalf of the Mining Association, on behalf of Women in Mining, and also I would say the BC Chamber of Commerce, thank you for making time for this conversation. And also thank you to the audience members for your questions. I don't think we got to all of them, and I apologize. But let's keep the conversation going. Let this not be the first and the last conversation about how to move the dial on diversity and inclusion in the industry. And it's been a complete honor moderating this panel today. So thank you for the opportunity. And Michael, I will hand over to you again. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. It was a great panel, and definitely more discussion to come. And thank you, Tara, Bob, and Christy for that discussion. I'd now like to briefly invite Linda Smitherd, Chief Operating Officer of McHugh Engineering Contractors, and our sponsor for today's panel, to share her thoughts on today's discussion. McHugh is an engineering and construction company that specializes in water treatment and embodies the spirit and execution of innovation in our industry. McHugh is a gold sponsor of today's event, and we're grateful for their support. Linda, the virtual stage is yours.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, I'm Linda. I use the pronouns she, her, and I'm Chief Operating Officer at McHugh. McHugh is a water treatment company, and while we serve the mining industry across Canada, most of our work is done here at home in BC. Our work exposes us to all stages of mine life, from new mine permitting and work at exploration sites, to operating mines and mine closure and reclamation. Through our work, our team interacts with all types of people at all levels that make up BC mining. And from what we see, BC mining has lots to be proud of in terms of its commitment for change. So we're proud to show our support for BC mining by sponsoring BC Mining Month. Thank you to the panelists who have spoken candidly from rich professional and personal experience. As an employer, I see the challenges many new immigrants, women, and other diverse groups face when trying to get jobs. My company aims to remove barriers for everyone, and we see the value of diversity and inclusion on every project, every day. I want to thank the MABC and its industry partners for hosting this event and working to make diversity and inclusion part of BC mining culture. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Linda. Today we've heard some very compelling insight from industry leaders on the integral value of embracing diversity into our sector. It isn't just the right thing to do from a social lens. Ensuring our industry is welcoming of all people and perspectives will improve our collective business decision-making and create new opportunities. British Columbia's mining sector is well positioned to drive this change in this regard. We have a lot that we've accomplished, but there's still a lot more work to do. I'd like to thank you again to everyone who has joined us virtually for today's panel, and a special thank you once again to Fiona, Tara, Bob, and Christy for taking the time out of your busy schedules to guide us through today's conversation. I'd also like to acknowledge Suzanne Neal of Women in Mining BC for helping us put this panel together. And as a thank you to each of our speakers, a donation has been made to Mining for Miracles to raise funds for the Cellular and Regenerative Medicine Center. The center is the cause being supported by this year's Pie Throw event, and you can visit www.miningformiracles.ca for more information. Next week, we turn our attention to environmental innovation and decarbonization in mining, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.